Welcome to Curious Goldfish, a podcast community where music and curiosity come together through interesting conversations with the music makers of our world. I'm your host, Jason English. You can find Curious Goldfish in all the major podcast and social media platforms. And of course, we have all of our content on our website, curiousgoldfish.com. Sweet Megg, really appreciate your time. So nice to meet you. Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday.
Are you, tell me something good about your week.
I finished painting my parents' attic.
Oh, that's cool. All right. Are they in New York or are they in Nashville with you?
Jersey. I'm in New York right now,
Oh,
so I'm staying with my brother in Brooklyn, and they're in Jersey.
got it. It always feels good to accomplish something, even if it's just painting, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. It's early April when we're recording this, but in May, mid-May, you've got a brand new album out called Never Been Home.
Hmm.
So we're definitely going to talk about that and all the activities around that. I just had a few other questions. So in terms of your stage name is Sweet Megg, you've recorded and performed as Meg Ferrell for a number of years. I guess at what point did that decision happen to start going by Sweet Megg? And will you ever record again under Meg Ferrell, or is this it?
Well, it was really just like a business decision, kind of. Like, when I put out the Meg Ferrell stuff, it's because I was Sweet Meg came from me doing early jazz in the city, and it literally came from like me and my ex-boyfriend were doing a lot of 1920s gigs, and we were making a band, and we needed like an old-timey name, and so it was Sweet Meg and the Wayfarers. And that was like the band I toured with for a while, because I was pretty much doing a lot of early jazz and swing dances and stuff. And then I put out the Meg Ferrell. I wanted to transition into country and Americana, and I really didn't want to have a nickname. I wanted to just use my regular name. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try to push Meg Ferrell. And then I realized, like, I did Postmodern Jukebox with Sweet Megg. It was just like all of my numbers were under Sweet Megg. And I
Right.
was like, why am I fighting this, like, and trying to make a new thing? Because it was just like the difference in followers on each page. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put everything under Sweet Megg, and we're just going to go with it. And at the same time, it also was like philosophically, I was like, you know what? I also am trying to consolidate my sound too, because I'm very like do a bunch of stuff and to find a way to do a bunch of stuff, but have something about it that is consistent. And I'm still discovering what that means. But I was like, well, let's at least start with having one name. That's
Right.
and we
Okay.
might as well pick the one that's got the following, and that's kind of where it came from. And the original actual like where it came from as a sweet part was from Sweet Emma, who was a piano player
Mm.
in New Orleans, and there's this video of her, like a YouTube video, and she's just this like old lady and she's playing piano and she's singing this song, "I ain't gonna give nobody none of my jelly roll," which is a song I did all the time back in the day, and she's just like, "Ain't gonna give nobody none of my jelly roll," and so yeah, my ex at the time was like, "Oh, you should be Sweet Meg," and I was like, "All right," and it was kind of like a random decision.
It's well documented with all your releases how like genre doesn't really mean much to you. Like you span everything. And you mentioned the jazz bit. I guess is there an underground like 1920s, 1930s jazz community that I don't know about in Nashville, or is that just a carryover from your time in the Northeast?
Yeah, it's pretty much a caravan for New York. New York. I moved to Nashville because I wanted to do more Americana country stuff. I love jazz and I love doing it, but I kind of fell into that career. I didn't like mean to do that. I was like, all of a sudden, I was like in this 1920s jazz world, and I was like, well, this is cool. I like this, and I'm getting paid to do gigs and whatever. And I was like, just kind of hustling. And but I really like songwriting and rock and roll and Americana was like really kind of always been what I wanted to do. It's just like you got to go where the gigs are. But when I moved to Nashville, I kind of like I'll still do some jazz stuff here and there,
Mm.
but they're just not the same like players. There's just so many in New York, and so I did a jazz gig last night here, and I like when I'm up here, I do my jazz gigs. When I'm down there, I do my Western swing and country gigs.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, because the genre Americana, I attended Americana Fest last year. I was able to interview some people. I didn't realize, and this kind of shows my ignorance, but I didn't realize that Americana is so broad. I mean, it's blues, it's jazz, it's folk, it's a little bit of bluegrass, a little bit of country. So that it's not a huge stretch from
Yeah.
from the jazz world to Americana, I guess.
Yeah, that's why I kind of that term being popularized is a blessing for me because I feel like I can say that with like if I say I'm a jazz artist, they'll be like, well, that's kind of deceiving. If I say I'm a country artist, I'm like, oh, that's kind of deceiving. But I feel like I could say Americana and be like, I do Americana, and that could mean anything. It's like the weird rock and roll country stuff I do could be Americana, and then also the weird early jazz bluesy stuff could be, kind of just
Yeah,
can all fall into that.
yeah. Well, you mentioned your numbers, and then the stage name of Sweet Meg. I have to ask you about the Dua Lipa cover in the Scott Bradley Postmodern Jukebox bit because that's I think 7.5 million views on YouTube,
Yeah,
and
it goes like
2 million
viral
streams.
every once in a while on like Instagram. I get like tagged.
Yeah, how did you get involved with that project?
I've known Scott and Sunny and them for a long time because that started in New York. He started at Sleep No More, and so like we'd always kind of been in similar circles. And like it was 2020 actually, in February 2020, where I met him here and there, and I was in Nashville, and I was like, I should do a video, it'd be fun. And we were like, oh, let's do it. And so we recorded that last night video, and then that was like their last video they put up, and then COVID hit. And then I moved to Nashville, and they were based in Nashville now. And I remember I was like wanting I think we'd met here and there in gigs and stuff, and we had talked about I want to do another one at some point. But what's hard is I don't really listen to much pop music, so I was always like, what do I do? And then that Dua Lipa record came out, and I was like, oh my God, I really like this album. I like listened to that Lipa record a bunch of times, and I texted Scott. I was like, hey, actually like a pop artist. Could we do a Dua Lipa cover? And he was like, definitely. And we started playing with Levitating, and immediately we're like, oh, this is going to be super fun to do. And so I flew out to LA, and we put it together, and it was super fun. And it's funny because what happens is that, like it's basically like goes on like an Instagram or TikTok, like a little clip will get viral every once
Mm.
in a while. And the two things that happen is people will think that it's actually from the 20s, which I'm just like, how do you like? I'm wearing a jumpsuit. Like, how would you think this is 1920s? Like, this is clearly now. And they're like, Dua Lipa covered this song. Like, here's the original. Like, they're like, oh, I found the original. I get that, and then I've also got, oh, she's AI. Just like, no, I'm not. This is a real person. It's so weird, like when you see that stuff, and it like just kind of circles up. Like I don't know. There's always like those videos of like a dude like pointing up, and it's like Dua Lipa's version, the original version. It's like it's so stupid.
Well, it's so well done that if you didn't know any better, you'd be like, okay, this is its own thing with its,
Yeah,
it,
that
it's
space they had. I mean, they had this mansion in
yeah,
LA that they would film it at, and it was
gorgeous.
like this old. It was exactly like what it looked like. It was like an old. I think it was like Judge's old mansion, like old
Yeah.
Hollywood kind of vibe. It was really something else.
Do you see yourself in Nashville like for the duration, or are you open to? Because I know you've traveled around the world quite a bit, and obviously you grew up in the Northeast, but
Mm.
is Nashville home, do you think?
Yeah, for a while at least, I think. I think for now Nashville's home. I mean, I love New York and I always will, but I feel like now that I've slowed down from the Northeast pace, I can't speed back up. I like the pace of Nashville a lot, and I feel like if I move, I could see myself moving to, I mean, like France and Paris because I've lived there
Mm.
before, or Ireland or something. Like we've talked about London here and there, and then recently we've talked. We went to Tulsa, and we're kind of like that seems like a cool place to live for like 40s, like 30s Nashville, 40s Tulsa maybe because it's like it's a good place to have a family. I don't know. But I don't know. I'll probably eventually move from Nashville, or maybe I will never move from Nashville. I don't know. But right now,
Yeah,
definitely home. Like, definitely feel
yeah,
good there. And it's the first place I've actually felt very at home and like I belong there. That's kind of like the source of the title of the album, actually. Like, because I felt like the whole album was like a journey of getting home, or like feeling like I belong somewhere. And like and I said that to my friend when I was in Austin, and he was like, "Never been home. Like, you finally are home, but you've never been." Like, so, you know.
no, that's great. I was actually going to ask you about that because it's a great title, but it ties back to Nashville. Then that's what you're saying?
Absolutely, because I feel like I've always traveled like crazy and hustled like crazy because I've always kind of felt unsettled, like especially in New York. Like I'm born here, so technically I should feel like at home here. But I'm I never really felt like I belonged in New York. I always felt like I was trying to fit in New York. And so then I always was kind of on the road, and like I just got used to being on the road all the time and used to just making homes in other places. And
Mm.
so I never, just kind of a feeling I never actually had. And like even in New York, I moved apartment like every year. And then I kind of realized it was like a year or so ago, I was like in Nashville and I was like in my house and I was just like, this is my house. Like I live here. I think it was my boyfriend just bought a house in Nashville and I was in the house alone and I was like dancing to Kate Bush and like lighting incense and just being weird and like, no one could see me. I could turn the volume all the way up. I'm so used to neighbors. I don't know. I'm realizing this in my head. I've never been this alone in my life, and I've never felt so much at ease. And it was just like, oh, this is home, you know. So I don't know.
Is it a good feeling or is it a scary feeling?
Well, it's definitely scary sometimes because we live in the country, and I get terrified because I am a city girl. But it's not like I love the being alone. I think that's something I never did. I never was alone very much because I think it was, just almost scared of my own thoughts. But I was alone all the time when I was younger. I like loved being in my room and like listening to music. But then I feel like in my adult life, I'm just like, out partying, doing gigs, traveling, tour, like people, 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 people. And I feel like I lost the ability to be just like happy with chilling and reading a book or like
Mm.
sitting and watching the leaves or something. And I feel like I'm
Mm.
relearned that skill and I love that. It's
Mm.
cool, but I definitely get terrified at night all the time. I like can't smoke weed at night if my boyfriend's gone because I'll get way too paranoid. Like, there's someone outside the door. I don't know. The country at 4 a.m. It's way scarier than like Brooklyn at 4 a.m.
All right. So I guess back to this notion of you traveling and feeling unsettled. I guess what I gathered from listening to the pre-release of the album is there. It's almost like a bunch of little vignettes in terms of stories and characters, and then also places. Right. So there's references to like New York, Boulder, Tennessee, other places. Was that intentional? Just, or is it kind of just subconscious, or as a reflection of your the unsettledness that you've experienced?
I think it was unintentional. Like it was something I realized when I looked at the album all together. I was like, oh, like because it really is that like I can think each song I can think of like really goes with a place and also like a time period of my life or a chapter or like a revelation or like each one really feel I don't know tied to that and especially the first half of the album particularly I don't know if there's like two songs where we added trains, so, like that subway train sounds from Paris, London, and New York, because it was like I
Mm.
wrote all of them in the span of time where I was in Europe a lot and traveling New York a lot. To me, it feels like, and I looked at it, I was like, oh my God, that's totally what this is about. I didn't even realize, but
Mm.
this entire album is totally about the fact that I've been like running around like a crazy person for years and I've never settled down in my entire life, you know? No, I don't know.
I was going to ask you about, like, there's a lot of great lyrics, but I think in some of the materials that were provided, I think you've said this is the most personal album that you've put together yet. I guess, why do you think that is, and what about it would reflect your personal experience in addition to what we've just talked about? Is there anything else that kind of is the theme that you describe?
I think that it's that because I think I'm more aware of myself, so I'm a bit more able to be honest. And I'm not like I feel like in most of my writing, I kind of like I don't know. I feel like I have this judgment in my head of like people don't want to know about that. Ugh. Like so, I'm like okay, well the real story I'm gonna hide in this like metaphor. I'm gonna like have this real story, but I'm gonna hide it in all these like imagery and this other stuff. And I feel like having been surrounded by songwriters for so long now in Nashville and like learning a lot more about it,
Hmm.
and I kind of started boiling that down, like I started kind of cutting the fat off a little bit. I remember there's a couple different songs where I was like, okay, you just need to take out as many words as you can here. And when you take out all the words, you're like, oh, a sentence has a lot more meaning now. And I'm not as afraid of showing people who I am as I
Mm.
was in the past. I was like, before I was hiding because I was like, what if people don't want to hear this? What if people are like, well, I don't know about that. I feel like now I'm like, no, I think people want to hear the truth or want to hear the story. You have a story to tell. That's okay. Like, you can actually tell it. That's okay. I think and I think I'm writing an album right now and I'm working on a new one. And I feel like each one gets more and more honest about what I'm trying to actually say. And it's funny because I'm actually really trying to not write, trying to get more outside of my head and like write more
Mm.
stories of other people. Like I'm working on one right now about my grandma, and it's funny how like I think that even by talking about someone else, I feel like I'm being more honest than
Mm.
just trying to find metaphors of my own personal problems. Like it's something about being able to honestly explore. Like, yeah, I really want to just talk about this other person's story. That's the actual thing I want to do, and just being confident in trying to do it is more honest. Does that make sense? I don't know.
Life is up, life is down, life is left and right, and all the things. But are there any challenges or battles that you've had to endure recently, or even in your childhood, that may have prevented you from wanting to be more open? You know, and is any of that reflected here?
I think so. I mean, I was an awkward, weird person, and I think that my parents were weird people too. There were artists in Jersey, and I think I just was like, I think I'm a naturally introverted person and shy, which sounds weird from anyone who knows me as a person. But I realized
Right,
like I kind of trained myself to not be anymore, and I think that that rub has been difficult because I think it's like everyone knows me as loud and big, but then it's like kind of the way I hide myself, and I'm trying to let that go. When I was younger, I did, dealt with, the classics, alcohol, depression, all that kind of stuff, the standards for musicians. And
right.
I think that's and when I was growing up in this area in Jersey and New York, I was so like stressed and unhappy and overwhelmed and stuff that it made me kind of start to travel. Like 18, I kind of realized I was like, I'm sick of being unhappy. I need to just change everything. And I went down to North Carolina and became a like whitewater raft guide and then saved up my money and went to France. I just like that's when the travel started. It was just like, all right, well, I'm unhappy here, so I should just move and keep going and just it was almost like I couldn't tell if I was running away from something or running towards something, but it felt like somewhere in the middle. And I think I did that pretty much just straight from 18 until a couple of years ago. I finally was like, okay,
Okay.
I think I'm finally here. I think I'm here. I think I started. I think if that makes any sense. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. So one song I wanted to ask you about for a couple of reasons. One, we raised our family in Boulder, so I spent 20 years in Boulder. So there's a song called Tennessee to Boulder, but the opening lines are ridiculous. I'd love your perspective and the context of this, because this is some good stuff here. I think this is the opening line. So it says, as I looked into your eyes, I saw something burning bright, and like a moth, I was drawn to the fire. So I stepped into the flame, and I got burnt and double chained. Uh, that's 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 good. Is that, like, what does that reflect? Was that
That's a very specific thing that I mean, period of my life that I think is I don't know most of this. It's definitely the entire last album I put out of original stuff, but I was in love with a man for a long time in New York, and wonderful, beautiful soul. And we just had this most perfect love in the world, and we were engaged, and it started falling apart in the end. And I was like so unsettled, and I fell in love while I was still very much in love with him. But I fell in love with my drummer,
mm,
um, and we were all friends, the three of us, and he felt like a terrible person for it. I felt like a terrible person. We felt so guilty about it, and it was so hard. And then I got engaged, and we were all in the band together, and it just was like and eventually had it ended. And the breakup was so painful, like to leave him because we were just that was so painful. And then that just also my life. I always say the imagery of a blender with the top open, just like and you hit go, and it's like when that happened, everything exploded. And me and my drummer is my partner now, and it took us a while. I broke up with my ex, and we like almost instantaneously kind of started getting together. But then it was so toxic because we were all in the band still together. Eventually, he kind of my ex found out, and it was just this really bad. And then like he started drinking bad, I started drinking bad, and we had to not see each other, but we couldn't get away from each other. And we've had this thing, we've always been that way with each other. And we need to not see each other. Like we need to not look at each other. And then we would see each other at a gig or something and then have too many drinks, go home together and have a passion of 3 days and then be like, no, we need to not see each other. And that's kind of what that song ended up being about. It was just like we had this stain, like it was felt that way. And it was like no matter where we went, it was like he went to Nashville or we'd end up in Nashville. Like we would try to not, and we were in Russia and we were trying to not in Russia. And then we were like, and so I was writing it and I was thinking about how it was like, yeah, no matter where I went, no matter who I had started seeing that wasn't him, I always just like couldn't get away from him. And I thought about that song. I could walk from, is that what Emmy Lou sings it? I could walk from
Boulder to Birmingham, right?
Boulder to Birmingham. I was
Yeah.
thinking about that. For some reason, that song imagery came in my head. And so that's when when I was writing it, I was thinking about, the stain and the shoulder, and then I was in that song, and I was like, that's where shoulder came in. I was like, I feel like stained, and I see him like everywhere. And then like those two words kind of wrapped in my head, like Boulder, shoulder, Tennessee, Boulder, Birmingham. Like, and I was like, oh, all right. And then it kind of came together in that, Does that summarize it?
Oh, that's, yeah. I mean, that's, didn't quite expect that. I knew there was something intense there.
Yeah, it's definitely intense love,
Yeah, I guess in terms of love through the years for you, is it hard? I mean, obviously that's not easy what you just described, right? So like, but just in general, even when you were young, learning how to write songs and get into music, is it hard to love and be loved and to show love and be in relationships with what you do? Or is it just like, that's life and that's love,
it's I am very good at falling in love and loving people. Was never good at being in relationships. I just never did it. Just like my dad used to always make funny. I remember he said this like a couple of years ago about me when I was my 18 to 20s. He was like, "You always had friends. You always had a guy. There was always a guy around, but it was never your boyfriend." And it was true. Like I always had like a best friend, and sometimes it would be more than friends a little bit, and sometimes it wouldn't. But it was like I always had a million dude friends that I was like loved, but I never dated and had the more relationship thing until that guy. Really, I had one before him which was just completely toxic and terrible. But the one that I was almost married is like the first real thing I had, and I think that's why also I screwed it up so much because I was like, I don't understand this whole like companion thing. I'm such a kind of independent soul. Like being accountable to another person was like confusing for me,
Hmm.
And now I think that with my current partner, I think we're both kind of like that. We're both really, and so that's why it kind of works, and also why we're like we can't, no matter what we've tried to do to break up and not be together, it just doesn't work. So it's like we just end up back together no matter what. So we kind of are just we're very independent. Like we're just like, I mean, he's on tour all the time with other bands, and it's kind of works. So I kind of feel like I get both the best worlds, and that's kind of why I can do the relationship thing because I can just be like,
Yeah.
I'm going to Europe, and he's like, all right, whatever, like I don't know. So
No, that's good. Because, well, again, just reading through all the lyrics, it feels like there's a theme of lingering love and lovers who couldn't settle. Lovers who couldn't settle, and then love that lingers. And I think you've kind of described and touched on that just through these little anecdotes and stories.
yeah,
I don't know.
I feel like
I don't know if
love.
that.
Like I'm a big romantic in a weird way, even though it sounds like I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm like I love Jane Austen. But and I say it's like, and I think it's true. I mean, I love a lot more people. I believe love is a pretty simple thing. Like, if you are attracted to someone and your personality, and you think their personality is fantastic and you're addicted to that's love. You're in love with them. It's not like, oh, I like that guy. No, I love him. I love a guy. I may not date him, but I love
Right.
him. And little flings. And I've very rarely had like, stupid, meaningless flings. Even if it was a fling that lasted a weekend, it's always been meaningful. And once I love someone, I always love. My ex, who I left, and was nightmare thing. To this day, I'm still love him. So it's like I feel like there's so many loves I can write about because anyone I've loved, I can still love.
Yeah.
Even if I hate them, I love them. You know what I mean? Once you love, you just don't stop loving, in my opinion. So that's I feel like there's always a million things to pull inspiration from. It's like maybe one song has four different people I've loved in it mixed together to create a new story. But
Okay, good. All right, so we talked about sort of the unsettledness and the traveling and a little bit of the wanderlust, and then the love. I guess, what do you hope people will take from this album that may be different than some of your prior work?
um, I think there's generally one thing I'm trying to do in general, and where I'm in the record I tried to do is like hope in a way. I know that sounds goofy, but I feel like even the sad songs to me are talking about a light. Like for me, Waiting is one of the outlier songs that kind of came out of nowhere that was a last minute throw into the record. And it's kind of dark in times because it is, I was in a really dark place, but I also was in this a beautiful place too. And the whole point of it is like, I don't know, to me, that song, even though it sounds like it's saying like everything's terrible, it's actually saying like, it, like, it is going to be good. And that's why I made the song pretty and sounding pretty. Like it just,
Mm.
and I think that's what something I try to inject. I try to leave people with optimism. And so even in the dark things, I try to find some sort of light thing in it. Um,
Mhm.
I think Tennessee to Bull is the only one that sounds just straight sad the whole time. Which is that one was a hard song. That one was a hard song because I didn't want to put that on the record. That's the song I've had
Mm.
for years, and I actually thought I don't play it live because I always am like, this song sucks. Everyone's just boring. I don't know why I have this like weird thing with that song, but then people like that song, and I'm like, I don't know. I have this weird thing with it, but maybe it's because it's sad. I don't know, but that's definitely something I try to be optimistic. I try not to just be depressed people because I mean everyone has sadness, everyone deals with things. So my goal would be to like someone can relate to it and it can massage any wounds that they have in their heart, you know? Because
Yeah.
I would like to be. That's not people and artists have done that for me throughout my life. Like music's always been a healing thing for me. And I remember being in high school when I first started writing, I was like, if I could make someone feel this felt or this heard the way that this song when I was listening to makes me feel, I've been a success in my life. I remember having that thought, and I feel like I'm always striving for that. Like doing what so many artists have done for me personally, like just as like a karma thing almost, like to give back. So
Where do you think you are as an artist today, and where do you want to be?
definitely in transition for sure. Um, I would like to be, I want to focus more on recording and I want to do, I think I've been a gigging musician for so long because I just, you know, I just need to make money and the best thing I'm at is good at singing. And so I was like, all right, I'm just going to sing all the time and like do a bunch of private events and like bar gigs every single night. And I think that I got a lot of chops, but it hindered some creativity.
Mm.
And now I'm like, oh, now I'm like, I think I would love to find a way to maybe work in the industry or do some kind of job thing so that I can like really just make the weird stuff I've always wanted to make the write the projects that I've always wanted to do. I think that's where I'm heading towards. I want to do more recording and more touring, but more specific touring. Like
Mm.
touring, like I don't, I'm a big Talking Heads fan, and like my dream is to do like he did shows. You know, like it's a show. You know,
Right.
like the stop making sense thing. Like that's what I want to move towards. I want to be like in that place. But that does mean a lot. It's a lot more work. It means a lot less gigging in a way because you need to kind of
Yeah.
really. So that's ideally, if I could get there with it, I would like to.
Okay. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, so the theme of this show is, well, the name of the show is Curious Goldfish. It's inspired by Ted Lasso. So I don't know if you ever watched the Ted Lasso show, but
I love that show so
yeah.
much. That show made me a better person. I mean that honestly. Like I'm not doing like literally that may have no, it actually made me a better person because it was just the empathy in that show and like I don't know. I
Right.
feel like I tell people everyone that needs to watch the show, so it makes you really happy.
No, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, it actually changed my life. Just in terms of there's a lot of layers to it, but the primary for me was the leadership lessons, that he conveyed to like the team and his coworkers with the club and all those relationships. It was just because my day job is in the corporate world, right? There's just so many relevant applications of his little things and how he treated people and, like you said, the empathy. and then obviously the curiosity. So
That
I
speech, that curious
yeah,
speech is like my favorite monologue.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. So the curious goldfish, it's, it's be curious, not judgmental, and then be a goldfish. And I just kind of tied those two things together. And my whole thing is I've always been curious about music and art because I cannot sing and I cannot play an instrument. But I would, you speaking of, you talked about gigs. I'll go here. I'm in Atlanta, and I'll go watch people, and it's amazing to me that they'll pour their heart and soul out, and there might be 9 people in the audience, and 2 of them might be listening. The other 7 are drinking and watching football, and whatever. So I just found it fascinating that. So I've always been curious about that, and so I was like, I've got this like curious goldfish thing. I'm going to start a podcast and talk to artists, right? So I ask this of everybody, but given everywhere that you've been, where you've lived, North Carolina, Paris, New York, Nashville, probably others, what are you most curious about?
mm. I think a big thing for me that I'm curious about is, I mean, is humans and I don't know, like the way we interact with each other. And like for me, when I went to school, I actually was really trying to not be an artist. I wanted to be a history teacher, like a professor, because I love history. First, when I was younger, got into philosophy because I always was like, I don't understand the world. I don't get it, and I feel like I don't know how to live right. I feel like something's wrong with me, and I don't get it. And so I started reading a lot of philosophy, and then it just made it worse. And so then I was like, you know what? I'm going to go to history because that's concrete. That'll make things
Right.
clear. And then I'm going to understand everything. And then for a while, it was good. And you realize if you go down that rabbit hole, it's also just as elusive. But I think because of that, I've always had kind of like an anthropological look at people and civilization. And I think that one of the things I love about my job and what it affords me is the travel and to meet people. Like when you go to a new city as a touring musician, especially as a jazz musician, because you immediately find the local jazz musician and you're probably going to crash on their couch. You immediately get into the inner circle of the city, and
Mm.
you get to see like for example, or where I just was in Tulsa, like we were out there with JD McPherson, and he's like running this two-step thing. So I met all these musicians that he set me up with, and all this stuff. Immediately, just like got to the source of Tulsa my first time there, and learned all about it and how it works and the history of it and all this stuff. And like it just feels like a way you can see like, huh, it's interesting how this scene has evolved and why the music is the way it is based on its surroundings versus being in St. Louis and that scene. And I find that fascinating. Like, why is this group of people this way and this group of people that way, and what draws people to this side of the country and draws people to that side of the country? Or why do the audiences react differently in Paris than they do in New York City? Like, I find that stuff really fascinating. Just like kind of, it's like I feel like in my head I have this like constant building notebook of like, oh, that's a thing that's there, and that's a thing that's not there, and that's a thing that's there, and people like that do that, and just kind of building my picture of humanity and civilization based on all my travels and stuff like that. Does that make any sense?
I love that. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. But you're home now, right? You think you found your home. So I guess, Nashville is a great melting pot, but it's wild that you live out in the country because I can see how your soul would be sort of drawn to, you know, yes, travel, but also other, experiencing other parts of the world, right?
Well, why one of the reasons we did want to move to the country is we wanted some space. We both are we both I mean he's always been a solitary like person who likes projects. I'm realizing that I'm that way, and I just denied myself it for a long time. And so, but because we travel so much, like I feel like I wouldn't want to live only in the country, but
Yeah.
I'm in New York City for 2 weeks. You know, like
Yeah.
I
You get
get,
to experience everything.
I
Yeah.
have all these, yeah, and I have all these other places I get to go all the time. So I get, and it's like I also don't want to live in New York City full time. Like
Right.
I'm a crazy person when I live here, so it's like, but I get to be here. I get to visit my family. I get to see my old friends. I get to, walk down the block and get a coffee and do the city things. And so that's why I feel like I'm okay with living in the country because it's like whenever we're home, that's the exhale. And I
Mm,
usually need a couple days to just be with no one. And
mm.
I, rarely get to see my partner because he's on the tour all the time. So it's like we usually need like 3 days to be like, oh, hey, who are you again? Cool, this is fun. And then kind of go out again. And usually, like back in the day when I was in New York, I would get off, start my life back again. I would like get off tour and just like jump to a gig or go to the next tour. I never had that time to like decompress, and that's why the country gives you that, because it's like literally you have to put yourself in a box in the woods, and you're like, all right, sit still for 2 days, and then you can jump back out in the world. So I don't know. It's a great balance for us. We really,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love the balance, but I can't sit still. So it's like I'll never live in one place. So might as well have the home be calm.
That's beautiful. All right. Well, May 16th, new album, Never Been Home from Sweet Meg. I imagine you're going to support it with a tour. Has that come together? Are the dates
Hmm.
gonna be available yet? Or
Yeah. Well, I've got here. I'm going back up here. So I'm gonna be in like North Carolina, and New York and Massachusetts, and then back through North Carolina again. Then I do Midwest a little bit in May, and then in June and July, I'm gonna go to California and back. So I'll be in Texas and California, up and down California, and then Wyoming. And I'm trying to book in Colorado right now. So I'm talking to one place in Denver, and figuring that out. Just like finishing the end of that tour really quick. And then in August, I will be in Maine and upstate New York. That's kind of tradition. I do this gig every August for my vacation
awesome.
gigs. So yeah,
Well,
I'm always
if you're
moving
gonna be in
around.
Colorado, you got to play the Boulder Theater or the Fox Theater in Boulder and sing the song
Okay,
finally in front of a live audience.
I know. Well, I'm working on it. I'm working in Denver, but my friends are just telling me about Boulder too. So I'm like emailing
Yeah,
places right now. Maybe I'll look at those places and see.
yeah, yeah.
I'm like,
No,
I was in this circus gig all last year that got canceled. So all my torrent booking is like behind by a couple months. So I'm like trying to catch up real quick with booking agents and stuff. So we're
yeah,
figuring
yeah.
out the year. We're figuring out the year rapidly and figuring it out. But I'll be posting hopefully within a week or two all the dates. That's the goal.
Okay, good. Well, it was a pleasure to meet you. Thanks so much for the conversation. Congrats on the album, and hope you have a great rest of 2025. Sweet Meg.
Yeah,
Thank you.
nice to meet you. Have a good one.